Welcome to our series Myers-Briggs for Midlife Career Changers. I'm David, producer of the series. I'm with Edythe Richards, Myers-Briggs Master Practitioner and founder of atopcareer.com. Today, we're going to look at the ESTJ type and what mid-career ESTJs need in order for their careers to be satisfying. Edythe will provide an overview of this type as it relates to work, a brief mention of the cognitive functions, which are the middle two letters of the Myers-Briggs type, ESTJ strengths and weaknesses, and finally, possible career paths and recommendations for this type. Let's start with the overview first, please, Edythe.
Thanks for the introduction, David. So ESTJ stands for extroverted. They're energized by the outer world of people and activity. Sensing, they pay more attention to sensory information, details, and have a practical focus on information gathering instead of an abstract focus. Thinking, when making decisions, they tend to focus on logic and analysis before personal values. And judging, they're decisive and prefer structure and control over spontaneity and flexibility. ESTJs typically like to organize projects, operations, procedures, and people, and they like to get things done. Thus, they're often found in leadership or management positions. They live by a clear set of standards and beliefs and make a systematic effort to follow these, and they expect the same of others. They value competence, efficiency, and results.
I've heard ESTJs described as life's administrators. Would you say this is accurate?
Yes, the combination of hands-on perception and analytical judgment focused in a lifestyle of structure and order makes ESTJs the administrators of the world. If you want a job done, a regulation established, a system implemented, or an ongoing program evaluated, call on an ESTJ to do it.
So these types need to not only be outgoing and proactive, but responsible about meeting deadlines.
That's very true. ESTJs work best in situations where expectations are clear and known problems can be solved with proven techniques. They're organized and systematic, and they expect this from others too. Above all, they value competence and efficiency.
Let's talk about the cognitive functions for this type. Now, as we previously mentioned, the cognitive functions are the middle two letters of a person's Myers-Briggs type. In this case, sensing, S, and thinking, T.
That's right. The dominant function for ESTJs is extroverted thinking. If you recall, thinking is about decision-making based on objective analysis. Extroverted thinking is about looking for facts that can be proven in the external world and procedures that are effective. Sometimes it's about doing or putting things in a particular order. Other times it's about seeing if something is working effectively.
How does this drive an ESTJ's overall functioning?
Extroverted thinking is a very efficient and practical function, and it's driven to structure and organize the external world. People who use this as a dominant function are going to be at their best when they're organizing group decision-making, for example, and they'll bring a decisiveness and reliability to any role that they're given.
So they're able to look at the logic of the facts in front of them or lay out reasonable explanations for decisions. What about the auxiliary functions of the ESTJs?
The auxiliary or secondary function for ESTJs is introverted sensing. This is an information gathering process that involves storing data and information and then comparing and contrasting the current situation with similar ones. This is reflected in the ESTJ's liking for clear structure and work responsibilities and working on projects that produce tangible results.
A vivid memory and attention to detail sound like key features of this function.
Yes, along with providing a historical context that can lend structure to a current situation.
How do these functions work together in an ESTJ's career development?
So one marked trait of ESTJs I've known is that they have this sense of urgency no matter what it is that they're doing. They just want to get things done. We'll also find ESTJs protecting and preserving traditions and methods, which we see in most introverted sensors. They're attached to the familiar, and they've likely spent a lifetime developing routines. So they're going to find uncertainty and ambiguity particularly frustrating. The more they've done things in a particular way, the harder it will be for them to break out of that pattern. Combine this with the dominant extroverted thinking tendency to express their judgments and conclusions aloud, and you may find ESTJs speaking before they listen. In fact, I've known many ESTJs who've said things that in retrospect they wish they hadn't, or at least they wish they hadn't said them in such a harsh way.
I imagine these can be hindrances to ESTJs, who are mid-level career changers, especially if they suddenly find themselves unexpectedly unemployed. It sounds like in some ways this might be more difficult for the ESTJ than the other types. What do you think, Edythe?
That's an interesting point, David. It really depends on the person. This is one of those instances where there's a lot more at stake than what the MBTI measures. There are times when we all behave in manners that aren't consistent with our Myers-Briggs preferences. For example, an ESTJ I've known for a very long time has spent many years planning everything, even to the last detail of his vacations. He was just someone who didn't like surprises, and some people would call a control freak. I imagine he even called himself a control freak. Fast forward a few years, and he was married to a woman who was much more relaxed and spontaneous, and this brought more balance to his life. I think it also helped him to see the value in such things as making sure he has enough information to make an informed decision before actually deciding, and realizing that the process can be just as beneficial as the result.
I see where you're going with this. Anyone who's been laid off is going to have problems, but it sounds like these problems could differ according to what your Myers-Briggs type is, as well as your personal experiences and maturity level.
Yes, and this also brings up a troubling side to the Myers-Briggs descriptions. They can lead to discrimination and unfair stereotyping. These practices go against the very ethics and administration of the Myers-Briggs. Therefore, practitioners need to be sure to convey these limitations to users. But back to your point about dealing with layoffs. For someone who doesn't naturally see possibilities, the uncertainty that comes with being laid off, and thus the uncertainty of where the money is coming from and how the bills will be paid, can indeed be especially difficult.
That does sound quite troubling indeed. Before we talk about the other weaknesses of the ESTJ type, let's talk about some of their strengths.
Sure. First, ESTJs are direct, outgoing, and honest. They're comfortable expressing their opinions, and they're usually very upbeat. They enjoy interacting with others, especially around tasks, family activities, and traditions. ESTJs are also good at seeing what's illogical, inconsistent, impractical, or inefficient. ESTJs use resources effectively, making the best use of existing systems and structures, preferably through a chain of command. They have clearly defined standards, and they live by them strictly. Third, observant and accurate. ESTJs pay attention to details in a matter-of-fact, results-oriented manner. They focus on completing the task at hand, they're good at taking charge and organizing projects and people, and they like to stay busy completing their projects efficiently in order to move on to the next one. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, they're loyal and dedicated managers and administrators. As a general rule, ESTJs will rise to the top of almost any organization. They usually do well academically, which allows them to carry the proper credentials and to use these credentials in an authoritative way, demanding respect.
This brings up another thought. Aren't ESTJs one of the most common types?
In the U.S., ESTJs are in fact one of the most common types at approximately 8 to 10% of the population. ESTJ males in particular fit most of the norms in our corporate world. They're appropriate dressers, they're trustworthy, they're reverent. In fact, they could be called the epitome of the Boy Scout.
These are certainly qualities I would seek in employees if I was in the corporate world. But just like with any other type, I'm sure there are areas the ESTJ can improve upon. Let's talk about some of the other areas for improvement, or weaknesses of the ESTJ type, please, Edythe.
The first is one we've just mentioned. ESTJs may resist considering possibilities or options. ESTJs don't naturally question what options exist, and they're generally not interested in possibilities. They will probably insist on using proven experience to solve problems. In their haste to make a decision, ESTJs sometimes don't wait to gather all the information they need to make a sound choice.
Ah, yes. This is what you were alluding to earlier, Edythe. ESTJs believe in rules and regulations and may overlook different ways of doing things.
Right, and there are two more potential limitations to mention with ESTJs. The second is they may intimidate others with their forceful style. If anything gets the ESTJ into trouble, it tends to be their freely expressed opinions, which can be seen as abrasive, argumentative, or even rude by some other types. They may not listen to opposing viewpoints, and they can have real trouble listening to subordinates or anyone else they define as unqualified to render an opinion. This behavior can alienate others, which can also inhibit the ESTJ from moving up in the corporate ladder. Third is a tendency to be impatient with inefficiency and or a lack of procedures. Because ESTJs are take-charge types with very high control needs, and because of their sense of accountability, they don't cope well when things don't go as planned. They have no tolerance for disorganization, for tardiness, sloppiness, or inappropriate behavior as defined by the ESTJ. All of these are invitations for an onslaught of criticism.
Now, when you say this, I imagine ESTJs aren't pleasant to be around when things don't go their way.
Yes, well, ESTJs do tend to have a short fuse when anything suggests that they're losing control. They can then become loud, rigid, domineering, and this can induce a great deal of stress on anyone nearby. However, this is not malicious behavior. Instead, it's intended to further the ESTJ's mission to keep the world running and to keep people doing what they should be doing. They place a great deal of trust on their own judgment, which is often based solely on unbiased logic and reasoning. ESTJs thus have little tolerance for intuitive judgments, so they're the types who need to see the evidence.
Is there a development strategy you could suggest for ESTJs who are struggling with these areas, Edythe?
I always recommend learning to develop our tertiary and inferior functions, regardless of a person's Myers-Briggs type, in order to create healthy balance both professionally and personally. In the ESTJ's case, these are intuition and feeling. So, a couple of strategies. When encountering a problem, ask other people what they would do in the same situation, and then truly listen to what they say and take their suggestions seriously. ESTJs could also try something new, something they wouldn't normally do. Both of these strategies can help them to be open to possibilities and new information. A strategy to develop the inferior function of introverted feeling is for the ESTJ to think of something deeply valuable about someone else and find an opportunity one-on-one to express this to them. It can be difficult for thinking types to express things that they deem to be illogical or irrelevant, but the trick is to keep in mind that each person's unique experiences, whether they're logical or not, are in fact relevant.
That sounds like prudent and very logical advice. Okay, Edythe, let's talk about specific career choices for the ESTJ.
Most people tend to be drawn towards careers that make use of their natural preferences. When we're able to use our natural preferences all or most of the time in our jobs, we're more likely to be energized and satisfied, and the work is more likely to be stimulating and enjoyable. We're also more likely to meet people of like mind in these environments. In order for a career to be satisfying, the ESTJ needs an organized and efficient environment with explicit rules, expectations, and standards to follow, a busy and active workplace working with many different people throughout the day, the opportunity to hold a high level of responsibility where his or her experience and opinions are respected, work that is of a practical nature where the ESTJ can see the results of his or her work and where his or her contributions are measured in fair and logical ways, and finally, a stable and predictable environment where like-minded people pull together to get things done.
I've heard ESTJs described as doers, so management roles are natural career choices. Is that fair to say?
ESTJs are in fact very competitive and they're always pushing themselves to be the best. This helps them to become successful in life, particularly in their careers. So yes, managerial is the first category I'm going to talk about. Possible career choices include project manager, administrator, supervisor, office manager, bank officer, or database manager. The managerial fields are especially satisfying to ESTJs because they like to be in charge. They're good executives because they enjoy giving orders, making decisions, and supervising others. They're also very loyal to established organizations.
Ah, yes. These sound like natural and again logical career paths for an ESTJ.
Right. The second is service. Careers in this area include military officer, government employee, security, police officer, real estate, insurance agent, or teacher in the trades or industrial arts. These careers allow the ESTJ to work in the real world on realistic and tangible projects. Most of these careers require adhering to standard operating procedures and also require a great deal of communication with the public. ESTJs enjoy being in positions of authority, communicating with different types of people, and work that produces immediate and tangible results.
And the third area?
The third area is technical and physical careers. These include mechanical engineer or an engineer in the applied fields, general contractor, construction worker, farmer, computer analyst, clinical technician, and auditor. These fields require the use of the ESTJ's mechanical and technical abilities. Each allows them to focus on gathering, organizing, and analyzing factual information and to engage in deductive reasoning. Lastly is professional. Careers in this area include dentist, physician, judge, executive, and stockbroker. The appeal of the professional trades is the ability to work in established, traditional institutions in positions of authority. These are occupations that generally include hands-on activities, working with real people and tangible objects, and allow them to do things following a prescribed procedure, proven effective by their own experience and others whom they respect.
Edythe, you've mentioned some great careers and fields ESTJs will find especially satisfying, and of course the reasons why. But this is probably a good moment to remind our listeners to keep in mind that yes, there are occupations that are popular for ESTJs, but it's also important to note that there are successful people of all types in all fields. Edythe, is there anything that comes to mind that ESTJs should consider if they are in the midst of a career change?
Yes, thanks for mentioning that, David. For my ESTJ listeners who are stressed out due to changing careers, and all of your attempts at job searching are not producing the result you want, make sure that you look at the facts and details to see whether your goals and strategies need adjusting. Be sure to factor your family and or close friends into your decisions and acknowledge them for helping you along the way. For ESTJs who are unsure of their career direction, recreational activities such as journaling, reading, or art can help sort through emotions and motivations, as can talking to an experienced career professional.
Good to know. Any final thoughts to share with our listeners, Edythe?
Just a reminder that the Myers-Briggs is just one piece of the pie when considering a career path. A successful career change is much more than a psychometric assessment. The information in this podcast is based on my own knowledge of and experience with the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. I'd also like to cite Type Talk by Otto Kroger, Life Types by Jean Kumaro and Sandra Hirsch, and Do What You Are by Paul Teeger and Barbara Barron-Teeger.
That's excellent, Edythe. Thank you. Again, Edythe is a career counsellor and Myers-Briggs Master Practitioner, specialising in mid-career adults. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and of course our website, where you can sign up for our newsletter at www.atopcareer.com. Feel free to share this file with your friends. Until next time. MBTI and Myers-Briggs are registered trademarks of the MBTI Trust.